Though it is not usually made public, African presidents are usually among the richest in their countries. Most of the time, information about their wealth and how much they own is not available for public information, except when they have spent so much luxury, especially outside their countries, and Western media happens to carry such news. However, the fact is that most African politicians are very wealthy. In fact, aside from getting power, money is one of the major reasons why they choose to join the politics of the country. And we all know how they get that wealth, not just from their salary as government officials, but more importantly from bribery and corruption and diverting public funds for personal use. Despite the economic challenges and myriad of problems faced by the citizens of the country, the politicians in that country, especially the president, never fail to showcase their wealth and luxurious lifestyle. They buy expensive cars even with the ridiculous number of cars they already own. They live in expensive mansions, travel in luxurious private jets, and wear custom-made clothes. It's as if they do not see the high cost of living that is suffered by the masses, and neither does it affect them. This is the way things have been for a long time. In fact, there is a recent example of an African president spending public funds extravagantly while his people are suffering. This president is none other than Kenya's President William Ruto, who everybody knows is a Western puppet. During his 4-day visit to the US, where he betrayed the fight against imperialism by agreeing to send Kenya police to Haiti, President Ruto hired a royal private jet from Dubai, which cost Kenya taxpayers $1.5 million. Can you imagine that? The president felt no qualms about spending this kind of money, despite the fact that the economic situation in Kenya has worsened due to the increased taxes, a move directed by the IMF. And guess what? After heavy criticism by Kenyans, President Ruto defended his actions by saying that he is a steward of public resources and it was cheaper to travel on a private jet to the US rather than use Kenya Airways. How can using a private jet that costs $1.5 million cost more than using Kenya's local airway? President Ruto recently increased taxes, stating that the government needed to raise funds, yet he did not hesitate to use that extravagant amount for his trip to the United States. One of his spokesmen reportedly said that the benefits of Ruto's US visit cannot be compared to transport costs. In his own words, Ruto has gone to bring money for Kenyans. It will be 1,000,000 times higher than what has been spent to hire the plane. Now, this is a very interesting thing to say, because it confirms that Ruto did spend that sort of amount on hiring a private jet. The reason we are bringing up what this spokesman said is that after the backlash the president received from his statement, he came later to say that the private jet only cost about $73,000 and it was some friends of the country that paid for it. What a lie. If this is true, then as the leader of Kenya, he should not hesitate to bring out those so-called friends as demanded by the people of Kenya to prove that what he said was the truth. However, we all know that that is never going to happen. This is usually the case when the citizens begin to question the extravagant spending and luxury lifestyle of the president of their country. The leader will find one silly excuse or the other as a cover-up. There is no doubt that President Ruto rented that jet to impress. After all, he is the first African president to visit the US on an official visit in 15 years. The president of Equatorial Guinea, Teodoro Obiang, and his vice president, who is also his son, Teodorin Obiang, is another example of African politicians who are living the high life at the expense of their citizens. It's even worse in Equatorial Guinea because President Teodoro has been ruling since 1979. Imagine that. Not surprisingly, the president happens to be the richest man in the country. His son has been tried many times for his luxurious lifestyle, but that hasn't stopped him from continuing to spend public funds on expensive cars, designer clothes, and going on vacation. What about Cameroon President Paul Biya, who can always be found in Geneva, Switzerland, or the deposed president of Gabon, Ali Bongo? They and several other African leaders have consistently painted the picture of Africa as a continent filled with corrupt leaders who live lavishly at the expense of their citizens. In contrast, however, the president of Burkina Faso is nothing like that. Instead of living extravagantly, Captain Traoré has chosen to focus on the needs of his people and prioritize the country's development, so much so that he opted not to take the monthly salary he is entitled to as president. Instead, he chose to maintain the salary he gets as a military captain. Traoré did this, in his own words, to show the spirit of sacrifice which must inhabit each Burkinabe in the current situation of our country. How many African presidents can take this step? And don't think it's because he is a military person. His predecessor, former military junta, Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, actually did the opposite. Not only did he collect the presidential salary, but he also increased his salary and that of his fellow military ministers. And don't forget, he did this in the short time he was in power. That is to tell you where his heart and motive truly lie. Just like Thomas Sankara, Traoré drives a simple car and has never been found in expensive suits or any kind of custom-made clothes. Instead, since he assumed power, and in all the time he has appeared in summits or interviews, he always appeared in his military attire. We saw this during the Russian-Africa summit, where, unlike the rest of the African leaders who wore suits or African traditional attire, Traoré stood out with his military combat clothing and a red beret, plus his tactical gloves. Not only did he stand out in his attire, but he also stood out with his speech, which reverberated across the continent. He blasted African leaders' inability to be strong and patriotic enough to provide for their people and urged them not to behave as puppets or allow themselves to be manipulated by external forces. He said African leaders must prioritize their country's sovereignty and act in the interest of the people. Since the Russian-Africa summit, which brought him to the spotlight, Traoré has consistently proven himself to be dedicated and committed to the development of his people. Not only did he refuse to accept his salary as president of Burkina Faso, but he also announced this year that he planned to create a balance in terms of salaries for public officials, including ministers. According to Traoré, this meant that some ministers' salaries would be reduced while others would be increased. And unlike those African presidents who are notable for traveling outside their countries for vacation, like President Biya, the president of Cameroon, who is also called the absentee president because he is never in his country, from what we can see, Captain Traoré only travels for diplomatic visits in order to build diplomatic relations with other countries. It's no wonder then that the people of Burkina Faso gathered en masse recently to protest against an end to his transitional government, which was to end on July 1st. They would not do that if he was not a good leader. And the good news is that the national dialogue process to determine what happens next concluded with the signing of a new charter which would allow the transitional government of Traoré to rule till 2029. But that's not all. The new charter also allows Traoré to contest for election when the transitional government is over. Interestingly, while the decision-makers excluding members of Burkinabe political parties who chose not to attend the meeting deliberated in the conference hall, hundreds of Burkinabe youths gathered outside the conference hall, demanding that Captain Traoré lead them to the next 10 years. However, at the end of the day, a spokesperson for the youth boldly stated without mincing words that they would settle for nothing less than 10 years. The spokesperson also added that if the meeting ended without an agreement that ensured that Traoré would continue to rule for the next 5 years, then the youths would make sure that the meeting started again. Although the statement was lighthearted, it conveyed the desire of the people. Indeed, Captain Traoré is a great leader that every African leader should emulate. His entrance into African politics is revolutionary and proves that contrary to what the West thinks, Africa is capable of self-governance. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.